Hey everyone, Steve Poland here, and in early 2016 I did a video series about the growout system that I built at my basement crawlspace. The design was inspired by aquaponics systems, but I never finished one component that would make it truly aquaponic, which is plants. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is that I don't know anything about aquarium plants. I'll be the first to admit that. And second is that I began to doubt my original idea to put the plants in the sump tank. Once I had the system up and running, I realized that the water level in the sump was really low when the pump was running. This is actually a good thing, as it prevents the sump from overflowing if the pump loses power. But it didn't leave me very much water volume for plants. It also would have kept the plants a couple of feet down from the surface of the sump, which would require a very powerful light to reach them. At the same time, I had a tank sitting around that I wanted to use for something. It's an acrylic tank that I originally bought to go on top of my Quad 40 breeder rack. But when I arrived to pick it up, I realized that it was actually 8 feet long as opposed to the 6 feet long that was advertised. It was really cheap though, so I bought it anyway, hoping that I could eventually find a use for it. And it occurred to me that it might be cool to hook it into my growout system and keep the plants in there. Once I settled on a design, I got to work. I built the stand out of 2x4s and used a design similar to what I've done on my stands in the past. But this time, the tank would need to rest on 1/2-inch plywood because acrylic tanks should always be fully supported on the bottom. Fortunately, I had a few scrap pieces of plywood lying around. I cut all of my 2x4s to length on the miter saw. Then clamped them together and marked them for my dado cuts. These cuts are made by several passes with a circular saw. And then removing the pieces with a chisel. Once all of my pieces were ready, it was time to begin the assembly. I started building the basic framework in my garage, but I couldn't join the pieces together up there or I wouldn't be able to fit them into the crawl space. Thus began my work in close quarters. Again, it's a very basic stand, so the two sides are held together with cross braces. Then I attach the plywood sheets to the top. This is what the stand looked like when completed. I temporarily put the tank in place to make sure everything looked okay. And also to mark the hole for my overflow. The overflow is 1.5 inches in diameter, but I had to drill a larger hole so that I would be able to tighten the nut with the tank in place. The plumbing is all fairly straightforward. There are 1/2-inch PVC returns on each end of the tank split by a T. The hardware store didn't have any 1/2-inch by 3/4 inch T's in stock, so I had to improvise. The 3/4 inch end of the T extends down to a barb fitting, which attaches to a piece of tubing. The tubing is attached to the barb fitting with a clamp. Each end of the return has 2 elbow fittings, which allows it to rest on the edge of the tank and extend downward. I decided to use a pump that I already had on hand, my trusty EcoPlus 396. It comes with several fittings, one of which is the right size for the tubing I selected. I cut the 1.5 inch PVC for the overflow with my larger set of PVC cutters. I bought them back when I was cutting the 2-inch pipe for the growout. I then cemented the section that will extend down to the sump into the bulkhead. This is what it looked like once it was in place. Finally, it was time to fill the tank. Fortunately, everything is working perfectly with no leaks. The tank is 96 by 12 by 12 and should add around 50 gallons to the system. The overflow is loud, but that doesn't really matter because it's down here where no one else can hear it. You may be wondering why I didn't just split off my existing return pump instead of adding a second pump specifically for this tank. I thought about it, but ultimately didn't want to decrease the flow to my two fish tanks, especially given the height of this new tank. For lids, I'm using a couple of scrap pieces of acrylic and the leftover polycarbonate panels from when I cut the lids for the sump. All I need to do now is add some plants. I just need to figure out which ones will work best. Please leave me your suggestions down in the comments, and if this is your first time here on my channel, I would love to have you subscribe, because each week I bring you another video sharing my experiences in the aquarium hobby. I give updates on my tanks, review products, show you DIY projects, and share tips and tricks to help you take your tank to the next level. Hit subscribe to follow along. Have a good one.